tell me about when you decided to do it. What triggered it off, anyway?
Your RAF display. I was
Made you a bit cross, didn't
very disappointed with that because there was absolutely no mention made of the Royal Signals. Well, I didn't see any if there was. And I knew that he had quite a bit sent to him. There was Gibbo, we called Gibbo, a chap called Gibson who lives in Witney, married a local girl. Jeff Oakley, married a local girl. They'd both submitted stuff, I believe, to what's the local magazine we have?
What would it be? Not the Bampton Beam.
Yes,
the
that was
Bampton
it.
Beam.
Yes.
Okay.
Whoever was running that at the time.
Yeah.
And also, he had asked that corporal had asked for.
Yes, that was David Duncan.
Yeah, David Duncan had asked for some information, and some had been sent to him.
Yeah.
And some had been sent to the Beam.
Yes.
But I saw no evidence of it at all. I had previously also rung David Duncan and said, well, can I help you in any way?
Yeah.
And he said, yes, I'll let you know, but I never ever heard from him. So, and I explained to him that I'd been stationed there for years.
You know, I never knew that he had input from your lot.
No, well, you wouldn't.
No, because it didn't appear.
No.
And I didn't. I will ask him about that because I've now made contact with him again.
Yes, so anyway...
yes.
That was really what triggered it all off, and I put the remark in, and you picked it up.
Yes, and you said somebody ought to write.
Yes,
and I said do it.
So I talked myself into a job, as I've said it there. Yeah.
Yes, you did.
And it was an interesting job. It was a very interesting job, and I really hadn't a clue how I was going to go about it to start with. And then I thought, well, I belong to the Royal Signals Amateur Radio Society.
Yeah.
I know for a fact that a whole load of those radio amateurs that were stationed in places where I was stationed were connected with Bampton and so on and so forth. So I put an inquiry out in that. There was, apart from that, there was we have a server which the Royal Signals people submit to, and I put a submission into that. Also, more importantly from my point of view, as I wear the tie, was ex-boys. We were all boy soldiers together.
Yes, I thought that was very interesting. Boy soldiers.
We had been trained to do any of the jobs that the men could do.
Yes, in signals particularly.
Sorry?
In signals particularly.
In signals particularly.
Yes.
We all trained. Well, we all went through a proper training with arms and driving trucks. We were only 15 years old, and we've been let loose on the roads in trucks under instructors. And motorcycles. Jeff Duke, who was an international motorcycle rider, taught me to ride a motorcycle. All that sort of thing we did in boys' company, so that when we went into man service, we could fit into almost any slot within the Royal Signals. And
was it only Royal Signals that employed?
No,
doing boys' or the whole of the army?
The REME,
REME did.
Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers, also had some down at Arborfield.
Yes.
And some of those boys actually had transferred at odd times and came up to join us at Catterick in the Royal Signals. But I've initially trained as an operator, and that's where I learnt my Morse.
Yes.
And because I had joined at a late date, they had intakes, and I joined the intake very late, about 3 months on. So the course that I would have been on, I had 3 months to catch up on. So they sent me to train with the men who were training as operators then during the war, who trained much faster. They weren't being bogged down with how to drive a truck and all this sort of thing.
So they were just focusing,
operating.
Yes. And hang on a minute, from my memory as a child, I can remember listening to Morse, and it was incredibly fast. It was am I right?
Well, yes, proper, a qualified operator is sending an absolute minimum of 12 words a minute, an absolute minimum. And
that is a lot of dots and dashes, isn't
and
it?
then they go on much faster than that. Some operators I met at near Kidderminster, who were civilian operators but taking army traffic, they would be taking 21 words a minute down and having a conversation with you at the same time. I mean, it's just phenomenal to watch these people.
Do you think they were started as boy soldiers because at that age, at 15, you can learn that kind of thing much faster.
Well, that might have been the idea behind the government, but I think if we're all a load of little rogues,
Of course.
and that's why we
age,
were finishing up in the army. I mean, I was a naughty boy at home and was caught pinching money because I wanted money to buy radio parts. My hobby was radio, even at that early age.
Yes.
And my mother was my stepmother. She was a lovely woman. I'd love to say to her, "I'm sorry, Mum, I gave you such a run around when I was a youngster." But
A lot of lads would like to say that.
she was a state trained nurse, a sister in the local hospital and all the rest of it. And I think she thought I shouldn't be out delivering meat on a Saturday and things like that. But I was quite happy to do that to get the money.
Yeah.
But she wouldn't allow me to do it.
Yes.
And so I started pinching it wherever it was lying about.
And this was to make your own radio?
Sorry?
This was to make your own radio?
Yes, to buy the bits to do it. You see, I'd go across the old second-hand shop and buy a couple of valves or
and
whatever.
how did you
I need.
learn that? Out of books or talking to people?
Yes, I've got a feeling that I couldn't read properly as a kid too. That because she was always saying to me, "Sit down and read out aloud to me."
Yeah.
But once I'd got this idea of radio, I wanted to learn about radio. I used to get off the school bus, go straight into the library and get a book out on radio and start reading about it.
Yeah.
And became so intrigued in making the darn things, which was simple in those days. You just screwed it down to a piece of wood, and that really is what got me going on radio. It was.
And so, how did the chance come up of becoming a boy soldier? How did you know about that?
I didn't. My father wanted to put me into the Navy. He made inquiries. There was no availability for boys at that particular time for some reason or another.
So what date are we now?
We're talking 1943.
Okay.
And he probably started looking about 1942 because it was early February that I joined the Royal Signals. But I said, well, no, I don't want to go in the Navy anyway, and I'd like to go in the RAF. I wanted to be a wireless operator air gunner, which was probably a good thing that I wasn't, because we lost those poor souls at a rate of knots. But I suppose the wireless operator part was still hanging on. I failed the RAF exam on the mathematics. They had boys, aircraft apprentices, I think they called them. But the Army said yes, they would have me in, so I went up to Catterick in February 1943 as a boy soldier.
Okay. And that was your basic training, wasn't it?
That was my basic training. I knew Morse at that time.
Yeah.
I also knew about radio,
Yeah.
which stood me in good stead, because although I was 2 or 3 months behind the main course, I was on top of them before those guys had even caught up to me, so to speak.
Yes.
So I did well in there and came out of boy service in 1945 and was posted to Droitwich in Worcestershire.
So were you there in Catterick for 2 years? Is that right? 43 to
Yes,
45?
I was there from February 43 to my 17th birthday on May the 16th in 1945.
And then off to Droitwich?
And then they sent me out into man service, straight out.
And what's at Droitwich?
Droitwich was the transmitter station.
Okay.
It was the other end, so to speak, for Bampton.
Right.
And although Bampton wasn't in existence at that time, it was, but it wasn't heard of so much in those days. It was, they had built it by 1943, I tell a lie, but we didn't know about it up there. We were more concerned with a place called Oakhanger that seemed to be the main station in those days. But at Droitwich there was transmitters, high power transmitters, transmitting to all over the world, Singapore, Accra, well it wasn't Singapore because it wasn't free then, but Accra, Nairobi, Canada, Washington, all over the shop there we were transmitting.
So is Droitwich the hub? Is it for the...
Droitwich was this main transmitter hub station, yes, if you like.
Yeah.
It was controlled from London,
Yeah.
at the Citadel, which was underground. All the wireless operators were underground there.
Where? Do you know where?
Whitehall, I believe.
Somewhere in Whitehall, okay.
Somewhere around about Whitehall.
Yeah.
It was called the Pit. The lads all called it the Pit.
Yep.
And I briefly stopped off at the barracks there. Well, they weren't barracks, they were private houses which had been taken over by the service. On my way from Droitwich, on my way from Boys Company to Droitwich, that was the sort of holding place. It was War Office Signals, it was called. So I was posted there, and then posted from War Office Signals London to Droitwich.
Okay.
And that was my first main posting, was there.
For how long?
What, at Droitwich?
Yes.
I was about there 2 years, but I also, while I was there, went to this, which was a post office wireless station near Kidderminster, known as Park Atwood, and that was a big private house. It was on the side of a hill, and the aerial stood on the side of the hill. It was a bit difficult to maintain, but because I was told, because the services had taken most of the post office engineers,
Yeah.
the service was sort of putting the trained service engineers back in to the post office to assist them in their maintenance. So I was posted to this small station. There was about 4 radio receivers there, that's all that was there, with these civilians. There was half a dozen ATS girls doing cooking and driving the truck.
Yeah.
And it was quite a nice place and quite exciting. I mean, I was 18 then, 17, 18.
ATS
And
girls.
of course, to be dumped with a load of ATS girls in a small place like this. And it had a little, it'd obviously been a barn, but it had an upstairs to it.
Yeah.
So we used to have dances up there every night. You know?
Lovely. Yeah.
And it was good fun.
And the work is mostly. I'm just going back to the photographs in your book. Sitting there with these big earphones on,
Right.
listening to Morse code, translating it
Yeah.
into words.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which gets sent to.
Wherever, all over the world,
Okay.
really.
Okay.
That
So
was
are you
high.
passing it on as Morse code, or are you passing it on as?
No, that was
messages?
getting passed on as Morse code in those
it?
days.
Right.
What they called high-speed Morse,
Yeah.
because the guys would type it up on a thing called a perforator,
Okay.
which did exactly that, perforated
holes.
strips of paper, punched holes in it,
Yes.
and then you fed that into a little machine,
Yeah.
which sent the signal out down the line to key the transmitter.
Okay.
And so it was high-speed Morse. And at the other end, they had a thing called an undulator, which was connected to the radio they were listening to. And it was a very simple device. If you got a signal DAR, the arm would move up and hold there until that had finished and go back again. If you got a DIT, it'd do the same thing. So if you looked at the paper, you got dots and dashes on your
Yes.
paper.
Yes.
And they'd read that as well, you see.
Yes. And you said dar and dit. Whereas I
Yes.
used to say dot dot dash. But it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didar, we were.
Yeah. Okay. Dar.
But
Yeah.
it's the same thing as dot and
Yes.
dash, of course. Yeah.
And when you're doing it, are you? It's silly in a way, but are you following what the message says, or are you just so concentrating on the bits that
No,
you don't get that all?
you should not do that.
Ah, okay.
As a trained operator, you just take down what you hear.
Yes.
So, I mean,
A bit
because
at a time, not
yeah.
really making sense of the
no,
whole.
if you try and do that, when you come to what was quite commonplace, 5-figured cipher, 5-lettered cipher,
Mm.
which was
Ah.
groups of 5 letters, made no sense.
Yeah.
So you would
So when it's encoded, it would make sense anyway.
no sense at all. So you'd merely take down what you received,
Yes.
and it's a marvellous thing that your brain becomes your hand, you know. And
It's quite different, isn't it, from being a translator, for example?
yeah, you know it, and it just flows off the end of your pen.
Yes.
I mean, it still does that for me today.
Does it? Yes. That's
And
interesting.
although Morse is no longer internationally required, it's almost declared redundant. We radio hams especially still use it.
Good.
Because when radio conditions are extremely bad, Morse will get through where speech or teleprinter or any of the others won't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why we use Morse.
Yes. So I can't even ask you the question. When you're sitting doing this, were you aware of any incredible message that came from?
I wasn't, but
No.
there is one recorded in there
Yeah.
of, and that was much later on in years, when it was on teleprinter,
Yes.
that one of the chaps, I think it was Gibson in fact, who was on duty up at the receiver hall.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you've got nothing else to do, you'd monitor the signal on a printer just to make sure everything was all right.
Yes.
And he saw this message coming through from Korea. It was when the Korean War was on. That a particular bloke they thought had been killed was not in fact killed. He'd been taken a prisoner of war, or he was in a hospital, or something like that. But because of the secrecy, he couldn't ring up the woman and say, "Don't worry, your husband's all right."
Yeah. Yeah.
But yes, so occasionally that did
Yes.
happen, but
Yeah.
seldom. When the atomic tests were carried out in Woomera, we were naturally waiting for that. We knew what was going to come, so we were naturally waiting for it to see that the tests had been carried out as it went through on its way to London.
Yes. So you're sitting there, very aware of important events happening on the road.
Absolutely.
Yes, right
Absolutely.
on the top of it. Yeah.
Field operator, you see, I was what they called a base. This was a base station.
Yeah.
When you got down to field level, which were the smaller radios in the backs of trucks, bouncing along over muddy roads and goodness knows where, the guys were very aware of what was going on and what they were sending.
Yeah.
And they also used to encrypt their own messages, a lot of them, so they'd see it in plain language and encrypt it and then send it. Whereas base stations tended to have their own encryption rooms, and it was all encrypted, and those guys would be the only people who know what it was about, because when it went out into the transmission room, it was just a load of garbage, which...
gobbledygook.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so after Droitwich, what happens next?
Droitwich, I was then posted to Singapore.
Oh gosh, what a difference, yeah.
I was there only for 3 days, and I was posted up to Malaya
Yes.
to support the Indian Army and the Gurkhas. They were more or less left over from the war. This would be 1948.
Yeah.
And that was a nice little posting. I had my own little hut and 5 transmitters in it.
How far from the fighting front are you?
Well, the war's over by then.
Oh, okay, all right.
But the Japanese were still there as prisoners of war.
There was also a problem in Malaya for a long time, wasn't there? After
Yes, well, I was there. That was the communist problems. They seemed to be content with derailing trains and stealing the mail for whatever reason, and that was there. But occasionally, soldiers who were on the trains to guard it would get killed. So we did have some losses in that respect.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it turned into more serious problems. But eventually, that was put to rest, and we got a fairly easy life. I mean, I used to get on my motorbike because I was responsible for all the radios in South Malaya.
Yeah.
Get on my motorcycle, and it never used to occur to me somebody might take a pot shot at me. I'd just get on a toolbox on the back and off I'd go down to Johor Bahru, enjoy the ride, you know. And some of the roads, I suppose, would have been ideal for an ambush or something of that sort, but no, it never occurred to me, and it never happened to me. Touch wood.
This is the optimism of the young, I think, isn't
it?
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
And so that was interesting. I caught dengue fever, which when I was there, that was not pleasant.
No, it's a very devastating thing. It takes some time to get over, doesn't it?
Dear, oh dear. And when I think back on it, I was totally neglected. I went and saw the MO, and he said, "Oh yes, dengue fever, so many days off." Well, I was on my own in this hut. So I just went back into this hut, and there I lay for about 2 or 3 days, sweating buckets and not knowing where I was. But even that didn't really occur to me that there was something wrong there. You know, I remember the first day I managed to stagger up to the canteen and get a meal. It was marvellous.
Yes,
but,
that's incredible.
You just don't. Never thought of it.
I'll come to some of this later, because I was even looking at the Bampton life in your book. I was thinking, they wouldn't put up with that now. Anyway, that's jumping ahead.
Yeah.
That's jumping ahead. Okay, so Singapore then?
Singapore.
And Malaya, sorry.
I did 2 tours in Singapore.
Yes.
I met my wife in Singapore, who I had met in Catterick when she was in the ATS. But now she was in the RAF as a WAF in Singapore.
Yeah.
And I met her again out there.
Yeah.
And we got married out there in November. I ought to remember, didn't I?
Yes, you
48,
should.
I think it was.
Right.
So that was when I got married out there.
Yes.
And we lived in various private accommodations around and about Singapore. I had, by that time, I was a sergeant, and I was in charge of the radio station there. We had just outside, not far from Changi Jail actually. It's called 4 Mile Point, and it was been a rubber plantation. The camp had been built by the Koreans under the Japanese when they were there, who dug a hole out of the ground, stuck a building in it, and that had become the transmitter hall. And then the soil that came out, I thought it was a genius idea. As they dug the soil out, they piled it round the edges. So
To make you invisible, almost.
very.
Yeah.
It was a lovely place.
Yeah.
The only trouble with it was when it rained, the water used to pour down the chute straight into the transmitter hall.
Yes.
And that was difficult. We used to have to get the pumps out then. But
In something like that, how are you getting electricity?
getting...
Electricity.
Well, it never occurred to me, but I suppose it must have come off the local grid down the road.
Okay.
I mean, the main road wasn't far away from
I'm
where
imagining
we were.
you being slightly more off the beaten track, but it
We were. It was about, I suppose it'd be about half a mile to a mile, but I mean, to the services to connect up and run a cable up the road would have been no problem to them in those days.
Yeah. Okay.
And it was a nice little compound we lived in. The huts were very basic, and it was only a small number of us, probably about 50 on that station. We wore nothing else but towels and chocolates all day long, until we got an OC was posted into the station.
You got what?
An officer commanding.
Okay.
There was just one admin sergeant in charge of the place before,
Yeah.
and this officer got posted in to take over. I don't know whether he was posted in to sharpen those chaps up, or what it was, but he wasn't having any of this walking around in towels.
But I would bet that in spite of walking around with towels and flip-flops or whatever you're wearing, in fact you were doing your job properly.
We were comfortable,
Yes.
cool.
So it doesn't make any difference, does
No,
it really?
no.
Yeah.
But no, we had to wear, and that, when I come to think of it, once we then had to start wearing our shorts,
Yeah. And long socks.
long socks and puttees,
Oh no.
and for some considerable while boots.
Yes.
Whereas we just used to have these chocolates on, and
Yeah.
slop around. But of course, with the belt round your waist,
Yeah.
you're holding in the perspiration.
Yeah.
It wasn't long before I developed prickly heat.
Yes.
And so you're jumping about
Yes.
and this sort of thing.
In fact, you were probably very wise to go native and just wrap something like a sarong around.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's interesting.
But it wasn't long after that I don't know who it was who complained, but somebody complained that it was extremely dangerous walking around with hobnail boots on when you're handling 4,000 or 5,000 volts.
Yeah.
So we were allowed to wear plimsolls for a while, and then they got the bright idea of issuing us with shoes. So it was shoes and long socks. It was it's ridiculous, but there we go.
Yeah.
That was a lot better.
The best way to dress is always as the natives dress.
Yeah,
actually.
absolutely.
Yeah. Your own version of it, of course.
Yeah, well, of course they had the sarongs, wasn't it? The
Yes.
Malays, you see.
Yeah. Oh.
And some of the lads used to wear those. Some of the lads used to wear those as well.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it was very interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so we better move on from there, and I'm waiting for you to get to Bampton, actually.
Right.
So, well, we better do it in a sequence, though. So where did you go after
From there, I came back to Bampton.
Oh, you did. Okay.
That was my first tour.
Yes.
Early 50s.
Okay. And now I think it's so interesting. Let's see what Bampton was like in the early 50s.
Well,
can you remember how?
Every other house was a pub. I think I was 17 when I actually came to Bampton.
Yes, I think it's quite possible.
And of course, the Elephant just down the road here was thatched.
Yeah.
And on the camp we had such people as Jack Lawrence and Frank Preston. There was a lady called Jenny, I think her name was, who lived down the road. She was the sergeant's mess stewardess.
Yeah.
Very nice person, and used to look after us in the mess, bring in the toast in the morning and the tea and so on and so forth. And
you're all living down at the camp? You're not,
yes.
Yeah. So
Well,
what are the buildings
I
like?
then got, because I was married,
Yes.
I was given a quarter along Bowling Green Close,
Oh yes.
next to Jack Lawrence,
Yes.
who we became very friendly with Jack. In fact, he became, when my daughter was born and baptised, he was godfather.
Yeah.
And his daughter, Barbara, who I've met not too long ago, about 8 years ago, who said that she recognises herself as the godless mother, not the godmother. And so they were very close friends, and Jack and Barbara. His wife had died some while ago, but Jack was the engineer up at the camp,
Yeah.
who used to look after the water, the electricity, the huts.
But he's a local man.
That's right.
Yes.
Lovely old chap. He was actually a wheelwright and coffin maker by trade. But,
Was he?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and yet he was clerk of works. That was his appointment.
Right, in the village. He was
Yeah,
clerk
but
of
they
works.
always said about Jack, or the lads. I mean, everyone had a joke about the guys up there. Jack would get the job done if he'd got a big hammer.
Right.
Hargreaves, that was the other guy, who was in the cookhouse, and I don't know why they called him Snuffy. The lads called him Snuffy, which I always felt was a bit unfair, and they made up a song about him. Snuffy's pies are the best.
Do you remember any more of it?
Well, they used to sing it, Snuffy's pies are the best pies in Bampton are Snuffy's.
I wonder if anybody else can remember that.
And he used to get annoyed at that, I know, but I don't know why they called him that. I really don't.
Yeah.
He was a good chap.
But when you say you're living up in Bowling Green Close now, Bowling Green Close, then what are you living in? Are they?
I'm just
huts?
trying to think round which way round it was. I think I lived on Rouse's farm at the time. It was a caravan, a little caravan site.
Oh right, okay.
And that's where I met Terry Rouse, of course.
Oh, yes.
I've known him for years.
Yes.
And yes, we used to have some fun with Terry. He was a good chap, especially when he was young. He used to keep us in fits of laughter. Well, he still does, but
yes.
Anyway, we lived there. Then we got a quarter, which was down in Bowling Green Close.
Okay.
And I stayed there. I did the 3-year tour, I think it was, by which time I'd got around to being a staff sergeant. Oh, in the meantime, I'd been a staff sergeant, that's right, and posted into the stores. I became quartermaster on the site.
Okay. Does that mean you're doing less?
I was
Morse code
technical, totally non-technical, and responsible for how many chairs there were in a barrack room and how many plates there were in the cookhouse and all this sort
Were
of
you
thing.
pleased with that change?
No, I was terribly disappointed and upset about it, and I'll give you a bit more about that in a moment.
Yes.
But one of the guys who worked with me was Peter Lewis, who lives in the Bampton,
yes.
married Sylvia Dew.
Yeah.
He was probably the best storeman that quartermaster ever had. If we were short of anything, I could rely on Peter to make it up. I don't know how he used to do it half the time, but he'd come into me and say, "AQ, we're a couple of plates down." I'd say, "All right, Peter, well, yeah, I'll fix it." And somehow or another, the plates would get made up after he'd been on a visit to the stores at. I was just outside Oxford. Sheets would be missing, so you'd suddenly find that an old sheet that was ripped in the middle would be completely ripped into two, and you'd make up your sheets.
Yeah.
So he was an excellent storeman and great help.
Fantastic.
And still see Peter today, of course.
Yeah.
And so life went on like that, and I remember one day going to Major Petty, who was our OC at the time, a territorial officer. Very nice chap. In fact, he introduced the Weimaraner dog into the UK and kept his dogs up there.
Yeah.
He was very understanding. I said to him, "This is a total waste of my training. I'm counting socks. I'm not getting anywhere. I can't see me being promoted and so on and so forth. Don't you think I ought to be back technically? He said, well, I agree with you, Q, and I'll have a word next time I can in the appropriate place. Well, I understand he was one who pushed and pushed and pushed until eventually I was suddenly invited to attend a course at Catterick, where if I passed the course, I could then go back into the technical line and I would carry on in my rank in that job. So I went back to Catterick to do the course. In fact, I think that's where I met Sarah, my wife, on that occasion. And I failed the initial test. I was called into the old man's office, who said, well, staff, I'm afraid you're going to have to go back to your unit because you're not going to be any use to us. And I said, well, come on, this is the first time I've faced a technical exam in umpteen years. I've been counting socks, I've been off the work. Won't you give me another chance? So he said, well, we'll give you till the end of the month for the next exam and see how you get on then, which he did do. And I came out top of that. So it was just a case of getting back into the swing of things.
Yeah. Have things in that time, in that period since your first training, had that changed enormously, technologically? Or not? Were you just out of practice?
No, I don't think it had particularly.
No, just you were out of practice.
I don't think stuff had changed all that. No, it certainly hadn't, not in my experience.
Yeah.
They were still using the same systems, which was to pass teleprinter traffic. It was all done by teleprinter. In fact, if you're meaning had it dropped from high speed Morse, yes, it dropped from high speed Morse was almost non-existent. And it was all done by teleprinters.
Okay. All right.
So, yes. But I was accustomed to that.
Yes.
And in fact, why I had been posted down from Malaya to Singapore was because I was the only engineer who had been trained in a particular system known as single sideband when I was at Catterick. So, yes, it all worked out very nicely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was back in Bampton again. This time
doing a proper
as
job.
staff sergeant. I was put back into the receiver hall, where I was responsible for shifts. You'll see there's a picture in my book of me tuning one of the radios, in fact. And then one day, the OC called me and he said, "You're being posted." So I said, "Oh, where to?" He said, "Singapore." I said, "I've just come back from Singapore," and I said, it wasn't good for me. I had all these skin complaints. Goodness knows, why are they posting me back there? He said, "Well, I don't know. You know how these people think up at wherever it was. They dobbled out these posts. Oh, Reading, that's right." And so I said, "No." He said, "Well, I'll see if I can get you somewhere else." So then he came up with Germany. And I said, "No, I'm still not happy at that." He said, "Why?" I said, "Well, because they call that a home posting." I said, "How is it a home posting? You don't get any reward for being in Germany, whereas overseas you've got the overseas allowances." I said, "You can't get home at the weekends anyway, so how's it a home posting?" He said, "You're most difficult, aren't you?" So, in the end, he called me back in one day and said, "What about Cyprus?" I said, now I'll go there, yes. And it was just after the Oka troubles.
Yes. So what year are we in? Let's
Sorry?
What year is this?
Oh dear. We're probably talking 58, I think it is. 58, 59, somewhere around that then. And so I went out to Cyprus and I stayed out there for... how many years? 5 years.
Oh, right.
But of course, my two daughters have been born in Bampton. That's some 50 odd years ago now. It doesn't seem like it. Yeah. If you look outside, I think it's 58 Bowling Green Close, you'll see an enormous tree growing. I planted that. In fact, the army planted it. I accidentally cut it in half and stuck the end back in the ground again, and it grew, and it's grown into what it is now. So
what kind of tree is it?
I don't know what it is. It's enormous.
Oh, right. I'll go check it out.
It should never be there, but anyway.
58. Okay.
Yeah, it's a really big tree. So yes, I was posted to Cyprus, and out there that was a very interesting job. We were on. I don't mention it at all in there because although it would have eventually have been connected to the Army Wireless Chain, as it was called then, it was remote. It was secret radio connected with GCHQ.
Yes.
Get it right at the moment, and it was connected with them, and we were doing the same sort of work, only on a military basis as they were doing at Cheltenham.
Yeah.
As such, there was a whole load of their people with us, and it was very interesting. It was I don't suppose there's any problems about telling what happened in those days. It was, of course, the Cold War and so forth. And you may recall there was one of our planes shot down by the Russians.
Is that the U2 incident?
That's right.
Yes.
Gary somebody or another, but
yes, this is about
the idea was
60, yes.
that you would fly a plane up the borders of Russia, which would activate their radar systems and all the military radios, and of course these guys from GCHQ would sit there and monitor what was going on, and therefore we would learn their procedures. He must have strayed over the edge and got shot down as a result of it.
Yeah.
So it was all that sort of work, but I had to maintain the equipment. I was responsible for the workshops maintaining the equipment.
Where exactly?
This is in Famagusta.
Oh, in Famagusta.
Just
okay.
outside
Right.
Famagusta, the station was.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, that's another thing. That was a 4-mile point too. I never thought of it like that before.
Yeah.
But I stayed there and did a couple of tours there. And I was about to go into a third tour.
Yeah.
When a very old friend of mine turned up with exactly the same rank. By this time I was Warrant Officer Class 1. And this guy turns up also as a Warrant Officer Class 1. Well, you can't have two WO1s on the same station. This was obviously a mistake by these people in Reading again. And so the OC had us in, and he said, well, I want you to have a think and talk amongst yourselves over the weekend, but one of you's got to go back to UK. So we went away, and I said to Chippy Carpenter, well, I don't want to go. And he said, well, no, nor do I want to go. So he said, well, we'll just leave it up to the old man. I said, all right then. So we went back in on the Monday morning, and the OC said, well, have you decided? So we both said no. He said, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to flip a coin for it. Well, I was stupid, as I always am, and opened my big mouth and said, I'm not going to have my future decided on the flip of a coin. So he said, well, that's fair enough. I'll decide you're going. So I fell right into that one. And I came back to Bampton. I was asked where I would like to be posted. I was given that choice. And because the HQ was at Gloucester in those days, I said, oh, I'd like to go to Gloucester. Well, my feet never touched Gloucester. Gloucester immediately posted me back to Bampton because I'd been here before. Yeah. So that was when I got back to Bampton again for the second time and last time.
Before we go any further, I believe you had something exciting happen to you in Singapore which we missed out on.
In Singapore?
Yes.
Yes. It was called the Maria Hertog riots. Yeah. In fact, it's actually on the internet. I did look it up on one occasion. Yeah. When the Japanese were coming into Singapore, a Dutch family, apparently, Hertog, I assume their names were, asked a Malayan family to look after their baby. And they were going to get out and leave the baby behind with the Malayans, who would bring it up as a Malayan. The Japanese wouldn't know, and therefore the baby would survive if they didn't. Well, when the war finished, these people were still alive and came back to claim their daughter. But she had become too much of a Malayan, and she didn't want to go back with the family, and the family didn't want to let her go. The communists seized on this as an opportunity to cause a riot, which they did. And so they started going round where possible, beating up Europeans and doing all sorts of nasty things with throwing them in the Rochelle Canal, which was a filthy canal, and killing people. And but when this started, my wife Sarah and I were in a cinema. And when we came out, they couldn't get rid of us quick enough. They wanted us out and away from the place. And we got outside and we could see upturned taxis on fire and things like that. And it never occurred to me that this riot had started. We'd heard there was rumblings, but we never thought there would be a riot, or else we wouldn't have gone out. So I had a motorcycle in those days, and we got on this motorcycle to go home. And as we came up a road called Orchard Road, near Tanglin, there was a roundabout which led into the camp. And there were Chinese right across the road. And they were obviously going to try and stop us. So I shouted to Sarah, "Hold on." I dropped it down into second gear, stuck my thumb on the horn and just went straight at them. And I thought, well, if you're going to have me, I'm going to have you as well. And they jumped back, of course. And one made a grab at Sarah's hair and missed. And we got this roundabout and I went the wrong way round it. Just as fast as I could to get back to camp. And we did. So that was it was a really nasty experience, but the only one we were issued with Sten guns the following day without any ammunition. I don't know what we were supposed to do with them.
Just look for it.
I came back home for lunch, and we had a little Malay servant girl. The poor girl saw me come in the door with this damn gun round my neck, just screamed and ran. And she ran to my wife, who, you know, then comforted her and told her, no, don't worry, he's not going to shoot you. But it was a bit of a scary time, but that was about, I couldn't class it as any more than that, but it was nasty for the things they were doing. We had one of our trucks stopped, and the bloke in the back, the truck couldn't go forward, and they were going to try and get this bloke out the back, and he had the sense to take off his web belt, which in those days had a big brass buckle on it, and you could lock that and use it as a weapon. And he was using it as a weapon, and he kept them at bay until the truck started to move and get away. But yes, it was nasty.
Nasty time. Just to go back to the beginning of the story, what happened to the baby?
What happened
to the baby that caused the violence?
I really don't know.
No.
I think there was a lot of court cases afterwards, and she was handed over. She had to be handed over. Yes. But that was called Marie at Hertog.
Yes.
I can't remember the exact date, but it's certainly in the internet.
Now let's go back to Bampton. With its 17 pubs. How much did it change between your first stay in Bampton and the second, or was it just about the same?
A fair bit.
Had it? Yes.
Yeah, because some of the pubs had shut.
Yeah, already then. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
The butcher's, which was now where there's hairdressers next to the horseshoe.
Yes.
The butcher's was there, as I recall. That had gone.
Yes.
The post office, that was still down the road.
That was Wheelgate House then, wasn't it?
Yes, I forget what her name was.
Mrs. Reynolds.
Mrs. Reynolds, that's right.
Rather
yes, how can I serve you? Used to frighten the life out of you when you went in there.
Used to roll her eyes.
Yeah. She made a terrible mistake one day. I used to collect stamps in those days and get first day issues, you see. I went in there one day and said, "Can I have a first aid issue?" She said, "Yes," stuck it on, stamped it, and it shouldn't have been done until the next day.
Oh, right.
She'd got the stamps in, obviously, and anyway, she went balmy and begged me to give it her back, because here we are with the first day issue with the wrong date on it. I did give it her back, obviously.
Because it would be worth a lot of money, wouldn't it?
Of course it would, I wonder if she kept it.
Yes, there's a possibility.
Yes, so that was that.
But also at that time, I'm not sure when sewage came in, but I think you mentioned that Horace Morse and his horse There was no main drainage at that time. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, that was on my first tour.
That
yes.
was on your first,
That used
when
to
you
be
first came to Bampton?
Yes, I used to cycle up the road. It was terrible, especially if he was full up and dripping out the sides. I mean,
yes.
It really used to smell.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that had gone. And Bowling Green Close, as it is now, only existed on the right-hand side of the road.
Okay.
There was nothing on the left-hand side. It was just open fields right up on my first tour. But now there was houses there, and the school had been built.
Yeah.
So that had taken place while I was away.
Yeah.
Can't think anything else was particularly different.
How did it seem as a village? Was it friendly? Did you sort of mix well with the village?
Well, yes, but mainly I think because myself and a chap called Tom Nichols used to go out of our way to be friendly. We were told that when villagers start calling you by your Christian name, you know you're in.
Yeah.
That was what we were told. And it was a strange thing. I always was called Mr. Evans, Mr. Evans, Mr. And then one day it started Ray.
Yes.
And I went over and said to Sarah, we're in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I've never had any problem with them. They're always friendly people.
Yes.
And, we still have today and know most of the villagers, and they know me.
Did you do things like play Aunt Sally? Because there used to be Aunt Sally.
I never played any of
you
that.
never played
No. But I know it did that. And
Which
of
was
course
your pub?
The shirt races.
Yeah.
My pub.
Yeah.
I never had one particular. I suppose it was the Horseshoe, if it was one at all.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
They used to make the rounds.
Yeah. You see, the lads used to come down and drift from one pub to the next, and they'd say, "Well, we're going to be in such and such a pub tonight, and go there." But the Horseshoe, excuse me, the Horseshoe was the one I used to go to most.
Yes.
And
who was the landlord then?
Oh, goodness knows. I can't remember. No, it's too long back.
Yeah.
But that was our pub.
And the shirt race, had that started? That was
the shirt race, we used to
57.
always have an entry.
Did you? Yes.
And the devices to London Bridge boat race, canoe race down the River Thames.
Yeah.
We always used to enter a canoe. We designed a boat with a special rudder, because half the time you're doing this to turn it or that to turn it. Well, there's no need to if you've got a rudder. You just keep paddling away and steer the darn thing.
Yeah.
And with that boat, we beat the Marines.
Fantastic.
And that was one up for us.
Yeah.
And my son-in-law, who is a Marine, every time I see him, I say, "Was that the time we beat you down the Thames?"
Yeah.
So it's.
And you also had, because I was in that, you had you had all these hobbies going on.
Well,
you had an archaeology.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a story behind that. Major Petty said to me, he always is Q, always Q. Q.
Why Q?
Quartermaster.
Okay, right.
We've got to do something with these chaps, he said. They're getting into mischief, and they're sitting in that canteen every night. You can't get in there for cigarette smoke, and so on and so forth. Said they've got to have hobbies. So he said, "You got a hobby, haven't you?" I said, "Yeah, radio." He said, "Well, why don't you get some interest in that?" I said, "They won't be, but I'll try." In actual fact, I've got about 3 or 4 interested. But then it started, well, let's try this, that and the next thing. Well, the aerial party, who were responsible for the aerials up at Bampton, used to have to dig the holes to put the base plates in for the aerials. Were digging one day and came back with this load of sherds. And I said, "Oh, that's interesting. They must be Roman or Saxon or something." So there was a lot of laughter. I said, "Well, no, just bits of old pipe or something." "Well, I don't think they are." I sent them off to the Devices Museum. And they classified them and came back and said, "Well, no, they're Romano, Saxon or whatever they were," and so on and so forth. So on this, we then decided, we'll have to dig and see what we can find. And so that was another little club that was set up.
Yeah.
And a group of us used to get out for Wednesday afternoon, dig holes under the supervision, I think it was a Professor Adams, I can't be certain of that, of Reading University used to come out and see us and tell us what to do and what not to do. Surprisingly, the stuff up there was quite deep, 3 or 4 foot down onto a gravel bed. I never could understand that. And yet you go outside the gate and I found coins on the surface there. So I'm of the opinion that sometime there must have been a very bad flood.
Yeah.
And the Thames came right up to there.
Mm-hmm.
It must have been a very serious flood.
So was it just coins you found, or you found other stuff?
No, found coins, shirts. And what we used to do was box everything up that came out of a particular hole.
Mm.
And then when we were on night shift, wash it and stick it together again like jigsaw puzzles.
Yeah.
And we had all various pots, nice pots.
Yeah.
I found a toga clip of a dolphin.
Lovely.
The spring on the back of that was as good as if it had been cast today. It's how it had ever fallen off the person who owned it, I don't know.
You took it off.
And we had a little museum in the camp, but unfortunately during my absence in Cyprus, that all went somewhere. I was never able to track down where it went to, but there was a chap by the name of Williams who was closely associated with the Ashmolean. He also wrote out the reports, which there's copies of in there, which I had found at the Ashmolean of the finds.
Yeah.
So he maybe have put it into the Ashmolean, I don't know.
Yes,
but
let's hope.
I mean, I had one little dish. It was absolutely perfect by the time we stuck it together. There wasn't a bit missing.
Yeah.
We found salmon which comes from abroad.
Yeah, what were the other hobbies over there? Anything else? I thought
One
that was
guy,
most interesting.
Pigeons.
Oh yeah.
And if you walk up the lane towards the camp, as you turn left to go up to the camp, on the left is a barn.
Yeah.
It's still there today. He used to go down there and rake amongst the pigeons at night and find those with rings on them.
Yes.
That had come down. So they were good pigeons, you know, and it just got led astray. And the old man, he said, well, no, that's his hobby, that's what he wants to do, and he built himself a little pigeon loft up there, so he used to keep pigeons. And of course football and so on. But the canoeing was another good one because we could do that on night shift, build the boats on night shift. We had a workshop out back.
Yeah.
And the OC gave us permission that during quiet periods when we didn't have to do any work other than be there, we could go out and build these boats.
And dances and things?
Dancing, we used to have regular dancing. The Nuffield Trust contributed towards a bus, a minibus which we got, which was very useful because we could send that into Whitney to pick the girls up and so on and so forth. And I suppose it would be about every couple of months they'd have a dance up there. We had a nice little hall.
Yeah.
And I don't know what happened. Well, they pulled everything down. All the huts have gone as well from up there now. It's quite different.
Yeah. Some of the masts have gone too, haven't they? But not all of them.
Yeah, and some of those huts came from down here in the village that were up there.
Yes, that was also interesting because you were told you could have them, but you had to take them up there yourself.
That's right. So Jack Lawrence supervised the pulling apart. The soldiers pulled them apart, took them up there, and then rebuilt them.
And they were better than the huts you had, or?
Absolutely. Some of them were better than the ones they were living in, and yes, they used those.
But also, I can't remember which point this is. Maybe your first trip to Bampton, you were given 3 blankets, no sheets. That
would have been in the first tour. I was all right because I was living out.
But there'd be a few complaints now, wouldn't there?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And cold places and not enough heat and just one coal-fired or wood-fired thing in the middle.
Yeah, that's right. It was a little pot stove. And that was one of the plagues for the quartermaster. You see, you suddenly find you're going short on chairs. They were packing them up and burning them, weren't they?
Yes.
And things of that sort.
Yes.
But it was a good life.
You say it's a good life, but it's also tough, isn't it? You know, it's not as cushy as now.
They say today about we can't have bullying and so forth and so. But in my view, basic training in the army is nothing else but bullying.
You mean by those in charge?
Yeah, but it's there's nothing in it. You accept it. And somebody shouting at you, you know, get your boots clean, lad, and what else? And you're right, you'll do this tonight if you don't, and so on and so. Maybe it come under the term more of threatening behaviour, but even some of that isn't allowed today. It's very easy on a lot of them, but okay, the service seems to function all right on it, and or maybe they secretly still do it.
Yeah, who knows?
But it was a good life until really and truly when the National Service lads started coming up for being demobbed. That's when it started, this writing to the press and mothers writing to the press, and you daren't do anything. And Major Petty was so aware of this that the only thing he had on them was, if they didn't do whatever it was they should have been doing, they didn't get a Saturday morning pass, and so they couldn't go home, you see. And so that was his threat and the way he dealt with it. I don't know what they'd do about that today, but we weren't giving the chaps a time off or something, but it was a fair one.
Yeah.
They used to say, if your rooms are not up to spec on a Friday morning, then you don't go off on a Saturday. I'll come round and inspect them then. And so the rooms were always fine on Friday.